Today on Something to Talk About, we're going to talk about fishing. And my neighbor and longtime friend, Dave Shorett, is going to be with us today. And Dave is an expert in this area. He's written several books on fishing in the Northwest. And so he has a history of giving up his secrets, I guess. And we're grateful for that. Thank you for joining us, Dave. And I know that what I asked was based on an inquiry I got from a senior center member who said, I've got a little more time on my hands and I'd like to go fishing, but I don't really know how to get started and what the basic ins and outs are and where I might learn more. So I'm hoping that at least we can start with that, and then we'll definitely have some time for some Q&A. So if I know this is kind of winding your head back, but if you were thinking, oh, this is a hobby, this is an activity I'd like to get involved with, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give?
Wow. Well, a lot depends on what kind of fishing you want to do and how into it you really want to get. If you just want to, and I know some of this might have to do with grandchildren. Is that possible?
Yep.
Nope. Yep. Maybe.
Yep. I think that's possible. Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you want to know how to fish, you just need to get a book. You have to have a fishing pole and a reel and some line, and you got to figure out what you're going to throw in the water, and then you got to know where you want to go. I'm probably a little more helpful with where to go, especially if you have grandchildren. We're fortunate in that the Battle Point Pond is loaded with little bluegill, which is a little fish that's really easy to catch. If you go down to the would be the west end of it, there's a place down there where people feed the ducks, and the bluegill come in there whenever they feed the ducks. You can see them swimming around out there. They swim in circles. They're about this big. They're real pretty little fish. They're very easy to catch. I often see people down there with their kids or their grandchildren teaching them how to catch bluegill.
And what kind of baits are they using?
Well, they would use a little worm or a piece of corn. I try not to encourage people to use bait in the pond because that pond is pretty sensitive, believe it or not, even though it looks like a mud hole most of the time. There are also little bass in there, but they're much more difficult to catch. But that's a good starter, and it's fun fishing for bluegill. And don't feel bad if you kill one because they're overpopulated. They're a problem in the pond. The pond historically has produced some big bass. And when the bluegill overpopulate, they eat a lot of the bass food, and they also raid the bass nests. The bass spawn by digging nests in the bottom of the pond. You can actually see them if you look close. They're little circles, and they're about this big, and they have gravel in them, and the bass spawn in them, and then the bluegill come along. The bluegill come along, and they raid them, and they eat their eggs. So catching some of those bluegill out of there is a good thing. So if you feel like catching a fish, and if your grandchild just dead on wants to keep it, then that's not a bad idea. Usually I recommend catch and release. Certainly I could recommend catch and release for the bass. Trout fishing.
Well, let's talk for a minute. Do I need any kind of a license to fish up there at the Battle Point Park?
Yep, you have to have a fishing license from the state of Washington. And that's not cheap, although for older people, it's really gotten cheap. They'll let you fish everywhere in the state.
And you can get that just downtown at the licensing place, right?
You can, or online.
Or online. And Bill is asking a question about what size hook or line for the bluegill.
Well, the bluegill are not sensitive to the size of the line, so you can use like 5 to 10 pound test line, and then a little egg hook, like size 10 or 12, and you stick something on it. I try not to say salmon eggs, corn, bread, a little piece of bread, and then you throw it out there. Now, a lot of people use a bobber, which is kind of fun because it's visual fishing. So you have your bobber.
That sounds like grandkid fishing to me right there.
Yeah. You throw them, and when you're fishing with grandchildren, you really have to manage the reel, because the most spinning reels, they'll throw it out once or twice and they get a huge snarl in there. So you should learn a little bit about how to fish with a spinning reel and throw it out there for them the first few times. With grandchildren, if you don't catch anything in the first 5 or 10 minutes, they're probably not going to be interested beyond that. So if you want to throw out a little bread to attract the ducks, next thing you know, the bluegill will be there, and that'll help your chances. You can fish at both ends of the pond. That shallow area on the north end or the east end, you can stand there too. There aren't as many bluegill in that area because they're trained to eat that bread. Other than that, on Bainbridge,
one more question: is it seasonal?
No, you can fish that pond year round. And in the spring or in the summer, early summer, the fly fishing groups stock it with trout, and that's when you really have a chance to take yourself. I go out there then, or your grandchildren out to catch a real fish. What I call real fish is something, I don't know whether you can see this, but this big. That's about where they stock. And they also stock some large ones in there.
Just a little higher on your hand, you'll be good. There you go. Perfect.
You get a real fish. Bluegill are about this big. They're just real small, maybe this big. But that's a good thing. And they have a kids' day out there, and you can catch fish on the Sportsman's Club has a little pond on Sportsman's Club Road, and annually they've had a huck fin fishing derby there. It's a great way to get started fishing for kids. Adults are not supposed to fish there at that time. Other than that, that's pretty much it for freshwater fishing on Bainbridge. If you're a fly fisherman, you can fish for those bluegill and for bass almost any time. They're a little tough to catch. If you're gonna fish with a fly, you should use what's called a little woolly bugger, and it's about this long, or a jig. Just read about it and how to catch bluegill, and you'll be able to figure it out. There are so many online sources, and YouTube will show you how to catch bluegill. So that's it for local. If you want to go a little ways, there's a lake called Island Lake over by closer to Silverdale. Actually, it's part of Paulsbo. You can look it up. It has a fishing dock, which is a really good place to see other people fish, hang out with people, and they'll tell you how to catch fish. It's very popular though, and almost always pretty crowded. But there again, Island Lake, they stock that lake 2 or 3 times a year, and they put a lot of fish in there. And if you watch, for those of you who are into it, you'll know this, but Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has a website, and they tell you when and where they're stocking fish. So like if they stocked Island Lake on Tuesday, on Thursday, you'll see under their stocking section of their website, you'll see that they stocked it and how many fish and so on. And everybody else knows how to do this now. There's no secret. If you go over to Island Lake, there'll be all kinds of people fishing. And that's a good way to learn. It's just to hang out with some people who are fishing. Another one that's not as close, but nicer really is Buck Lake up by Hansville. It's a nice little freshwater lake, and it gets fished pretty hard from the boat launch. But there again, if you're willing to cast out a little ways and you're willing to fish from shore, you can catch fish there when it's stocked. That's seasonal. Island Lake is year round. You can go there in December and January and fish.
What was the name of the lake by Hansville?
Buck Lake.
Thank you.
It's a pretty little lake. If you have a boat, how many of you got boats that you would fish out of? I don't see anybody. Okay, well, a boat really helps. They have these little inflatable boats that you can use, and they're fun to use. And you can get out on Buck Lake or Island Lake and do a little better fishing generally. Kayaks anybody with a kayak nowadays, I see them. I even see people fishing with paddle boards.
That's a little unusual, huh?
Yes. Saltwater fishing is a whole different matter. You really can't catch anything from shore on Bainbridge that I could say it would be worth your while to go.
There are people who do some shore fishing along the strait, right?
Yeah, and people do shore fish. I shore fish from Bainbridge, but I'm fly fishing and I'm casting a long ways, and it's and only when there are coho in, which is right now. So you'll see people on the beach out at Fay Bainbridge. You'll see them in Agate Pass. Chuck, you said you were in Agate Pass with your boat. You probably saw people fishing from shore.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, over by Old Man House on the Suquamish side.
No, actually, we're on the beach side, so it might have been on somebody's property.
Yeah, the people use spinning reels there, and they can cast it out a long ways. And when the coho are in, which is right now, there's a chance to catch a salmon out there, which is, you know, kind of exciting thing. Other than that, you really need a boat to get out in the salt water.
Well, why don't you talk? Okay, so if you've got a small boat or you know, a usable craft, what kinds of are you looking for chum salmon usually, or what are you fishing for?
Well, you're if you have kids along, you can just go out pretty much anywhere in the salt water and fish for flounder. And that just requires a little bit of herring, which you can get at Town and Country, and a decent sized hook, like a small salmon hook, and just let it down the bottom and let it sit there. And by and large, there are flounder everywhere. I believe that flounder would keep the seals alive. They can't be eating enough salmon to exist. I see them eating flounder now and then. So you can do that. And there's the Point White Dock. Oh, I forgot to mention the Point White Dock. You can fish there for flounder. Keith Heinzelman, who's a physical therapist on the island, goes there. I know that. And he can cast quite a ways out there, and he catches flounder off that dock. That's another place to take kids. Used to be there were perch swimming around the pilings there, but they seem to be gone. But recently I caught a couple little ones fishing from shore, and I'm hoping they'll make a comeback. If they ever come back, any dock that extends well out into the salt water is a good place to fish, and you just use a little. Some people turn over rocks and they get these little crabs, and hermit crabs, and they stick them on a hook and throw them out with a sinker and let them sit on the bottom. And flounder like that. Flounder also like herring. So again, if you can get out in salt water, there's you can fish for salmon much of the winter, but it's restricted now. Very, very closely regulated because our salmon are pretty much disappeared. I'd have to tell you that when I first moved to Bainbridge in 1982, I could catch salmon almost every day I went out. One year I brought home 100 salmon, and I was fishing an average of 2 days a week. So those were the good old days. Now you could fish 100 days and bring home one salmon. So it's just not good fishing. You cannot fish for rockfish.
And there are a few species. Are some of them more prevalent than others, salmon?
Yeah. The chum reproduce successfully around here, and they are more numerous, but they're very, very difficult to catch. They're plankton feeders and shrimp eaters. They eat little tiny things about this big. They're very difficult to catch. The fly fisherman has some success with them. And then during the winter, there's something known as winter blackmouth, which is a salmon with a black mouth, which is a Chinook. And they exist in the sound somewhat naturally, but years and years ago, the Department of Fish and Wildlife created a program where they delayed the release of hatchery Chinook And those delayed salmon hung out in the Sound most of the winter. They're usually small, but they would get up to 10 or even 15 pounds at times. I caught one years and years ago that was 20 pounds right off the not the green buoy, but the far out buoy at Eagle Harbor. And you'll never see that again. However, and some good news for fishermen is that because of the difficulty orcas are having, there's an emphasis on hatchery production now of Chinook. And so there are going to be a lot more Chinook around. I've been told, I'm getting off the point here a little bit, but I've been told, and I've seen it in Hood Canal, there are what we call shakers, which are immature, real small Chinook, about this big. They're just spending their first year in the Sound, and there are thousands and thousands of them out there right now. So there's hope. There's always hope for fishermen.
That's right. That's one of the watchwords.
It is.
Do you want to? Can you talk at all about equipment? If I'm trying to looking for rods and reels, are there things I should look for, especially if I haven't ever spent any money, and I certainly am not about to spend an arm and a leg? Probably not going to get as nice a kit as you have.
Yeah, I wouldn't spend much money on a rod. In particular, any rod can handle what you're fishing for. I mean, it depends on if you're in saltwater, you want a little heavier rod. In freshwater, it's a lighter rod. So a rod is just a stick to get your line out there. The reel, spinning reels are what most people use, and you probably ought to. If you're going to get your first one, don't spend much money on it, because things are going to happen. You're going to get mad at it. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to have a line all over yourself. It's going to get messed up. So, a starter step, don't get one of these little, they're called Zebco, and they're real popular for little kids, and they have a little enclosed thing, and boy, it gets snarled up in there fast. The little kid, next thing you know, the kid's crying and looking at it, and you think, why did I spend $10 on this thing? And you see them all over the place. So I wouldn't buy one of those, but I'd buy a little bit better spinning reel. And go online, see what people are using, how to begin fishing, what the best simple gear is. Even with fly fishing, I tell people, don't spend a lot of money. I mean, the rod's a stick to throw it out, and the reel just holds the line. Particularly in fly fishing, the reel is meaningless. Except just a thing to hold your line. There's a famous story about a fly fisherman named Lee Wolf, who went to a fly fishing show, and all these guys are talking about this rod is a Sage XYZ, and it's cost $1,000 a man, it can cast forever. And he said, it really doesn't matter. And what he did was he took this guy's reel and fly line and was able to cast with just his arm. Put it out there 30, 40 feet, so the story goes. So that's a story I like to tell people who are thinking about spending a load of money on any kind of fly fishing equipment.
Just practice your own casting. Practice your own.
Yeah, if you're fly fishing, you just have to learn how to cast. Spin fishing, you don't have to learn anything. You just throw it out there. It's pretty simple.
That sounds more like my kind of fishing.
Yeah, most people are spin fishermen. They don't want to spend the time to fly fish. It's just too much trouble to learn it. And most of the time, you're not really casting much. You're just letting line off your reel into the water. If you're on a boat or if you're on a dock, you're just letting it out there. Most people are into throwing it out there as far as they can. That's okay, but spinning reel is definitely the way to start.
So you did tell us about the Fish and Wildlife website, which definitely sounds like a great place to explore,
Yes.
to find places and find information and learn about locations.
Yeah, it's a really great website, and it understands that people are going to it to learn how to fish and where to go. Now, the other thing that you can do is you can go with a guide, but the guides are all pretty much high-end, very expensive to take you fly fishing. There are a few salmon guides around. There's a guy on Bainbridge named McCullough. He's not too expensive, and if you just want to get out and figure out how he catches fish, salmon, that's kind of got enough people together. That's actually worthwhile. You know, I'm curious, since Paul, I think it's Paul, you're an ER doctor. You ever have anybody come in and hook themselves with a fish hook?
Oh yeah, I got pretty good at taking fish hooks out. You know,
Good. I thought so.
I developed a technique to twist them out so you don't have to numb it up and cut it. Yeah, in some unusual places. Usually it's your hands, but sometimes in the face. I think I had one in the ear once.
Yeah, I could tell my own stories about that.
Yeah.
Ended up with one in my upper lip one time when we were supposed to go to the airport in Utah, and fishing had been great. I just wanted to keep fishing, and we didn't know how to get it out of there. But what they did simply is just cut the barb off and pull it back out. But the guides have a thing where if you hook yourself in your hand or somewhere else, they wrap a little line around it now, and they have a technique where they can pull it right out without even bleeding. I don't know how they do it.
Yeah,
But
it's all about the angle. You have to rotate it so that the barb is disengaged. But so you were probably over the limit though on your catch that time, huh?
Yeah. I still wanted to fish. No one else wanted. I didn't want to leave. They told me, I gotta get this taken care of.
That's probably a perennial problem in your marriage. I'm not ready to leave yet.
It is. How would you know that? Anyway, when you're fishing, can be a little dangerous. I mean, you gotta watch your eyes, and you know, with little kids, they're gonna, you know, speaking to an ER doctor, be careful. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I don't know what else.
Well, I know that Chuck asked a question, which I'll ask for him, but suggestions about lures for salmon. If anybody else obviously has questions, they're welcome to type them in the chat or just open up your microphone and shout it out. Lures for salmon.
Well, you know, lures for salmon. I just ask the charter guys what they're using. I don't use. I use bait when I'm salmon fishing. I don't use a flasher. I don't like that. So I'm not an expert on lures at all. They have something called a coho killer that I hear people use, and I know people use MEPS. They use cast masters. They use buzz bombs. Probably the most popular one is buzz bomb. There's a guy who fishes at Point Monroe who uses nothing but a buzz bomb, so they must be pretty good. They're hefty. They're good for salmon.
But your objection is, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just had a question about the small salmon in Hood Canal. Hood Canal's a pretty big place. Give us a hint.
Well, what I'm saying is that they seem to be very widespread this year. And well, I was up in Quilcene Bay. They were up there, and a friend told me they were clear down to Hoodsport, and I've seen them out here. Excuse me, fishing from the beach. I've been catching some small blackmouth, and they in the past years they were there in the good years. So I'm feeling good about that. They're very, very widespread. They're out in huge numbers feeding. They're not traveling to spawn. They're feeding and presumably moving out of the sound into the ocean, but a lot of them will stay here, we hope.
One more question about licenses. Just a basic one. Does one license cover saltwater and fresh and?
No, actually, if you're over 70 or 75, I can't remember which it is, you get a use license that allows saltwater and freshwater. Otherwise, you have to buy one for freshwater and one for saltwater. You could, but I also should point out you can buy short-term licenses. If you got a relative coming and they want to go fishing, you can buy a license for you for 5 days or 1 day. and for the relative for that as well. If you go to the WDFW site, they'll show you. You'll be able to figure it out. Licenses are expensive. It goes to a good cause. Fish.
Right. And you said something about not wanting to use flashers. Are there some how much any advice about like green fishing or fishing responsibly versus irresponsibly?
Okay. Yeah, I got a lot of advice on that. You should release any anadromous fish if you can. I mean, steelhead, salmon. If they are natives, they clip the fin on the hatchery fish. So supposedly you're supposed to be able to tell the difference, and you can once you get them right up to the boat. But I know a guide who releases absolutely everything. He never keeps anything, and his reasoning is that what happens is the hatcheries don't clip all the fish they have, and the reason is they want to get their return up in enough numbers so some of them that are actually released from the hatchery have the adipose fin on them, not clipped off. And if you let that fish go, that fish is going to go back to the hatchery. So they want to be sure they get a significant enough number. So that's not a well-known fact. I'm not sure what your question was now. I lost track.
Oh, just responsible fishing. So
yeah, responsible fishing. Yeah. I hate bait fishing in lakes. I don't like it because I see all this power bait laying around the lakes. I'm not even sure what's in that stuff. Salmon eggs if you're going to use bait and you're fishing for trout, the trout is likely to swallow it. So unless you're going to keep that trout, you should not use bait. So you should plan on keeping that trout. If you use a lure, they tend to get it in their mouth. Almost never in their gills, occasionally, but very rarely. Bait will very often get hooked so deep that you can cut your line. I've actually caught fish fly fishing that had a salmon egg hook in them, where people had hooked them and then cut it off, and they survived enough to take a fly later. So to be responsible, that's one reason I avoid bait. I'm trying to think of what else. You should try to release your fish in the water if you want it to live. Don't take it out of the water. Get it off your hook as fast as you can, because it's so stressful for the fish to be hooked, and try to bring your fish in quickly because it's stressful, and some will die if they aren't released as quickly as possible. Those are basically the fundamentals. Follow the rules.
Now, yeah, which some people don't.
It's possible that happens. There's a lot of poaching going on. You see it happen. Snagging is another one. It's salmon season. You see a lot of people where the salmon gather in big schools, they snag. They're pretending that they're fishing for them, but they're hooking them in the side and in the fins, and there's a lot of that going on. If you go down the Hoodsport, if you want to see salmon in the water right now, you could go over to Quilcene. On the Quilcene Bridge, you'll see salmon in there. There are hundreds in there. And as they get upstream, people are it's fun to see them. If you haven't seen salmon in a river, it's great to see them spawning. But if you get upriver, you'll see people with heavy gear, they're snagging them. So don't snag them intentionally anyway.
One of the things that you talked about earlier was the idea of just searching online for information about fish. We were talking about bluegill at the beginning, but you were saying you can find out a lot of information online. Are there particular websites that you would recommend, or guidance on sort of how to sift through this mass, which is the internet?
Yeah, I really don't think there's any. The Washington Fish and Wildlife site might have some that they can refer you to, and those would be more reasonable. If you want to have fun, look up Noodling Catfish. This is without a doubt the greatest fishing website in the world. I don't know whether you know what noodling catfish is. But
Tell us.
briefly, okay. Noodling catfish is a very southern thing to do. First of all, they have catfish down there, and they have these channel catfish that weigh up to 100 pounds or more. And they're great big fish, and they have a huge mouth on them. And what you do is, first of all, you finish off a 6-pack or more. Then you jump into the river. First of all, you find out where the fish is if you can. These are, you know, the rivers are opaque basically, but you sort of know where those catfish hang out. You jump in the river. Well, it's very important that you have your sleeve rolled up. And to explain why in a minute. You jump in the river, and you get down toward the bottom, and you see this catfish looking at you. And the catfish has got his mouth open. And what you do is you jam your fist inside his mouth as far as you can go. And the catfish clamps down on your arm. That's the noodle part. And then the catfish starts doing this. And a 100-pound catfish has got a tremendous amount of force. So in the video, you'll see this catfish thrash around. The guy's arm is going like this. And he's trying to get to shore. And his catfish is holding on for all he's worth. He gets to shore, and he managed to get, he's yelling, yahoo, and all this stuff, you know. And everybody else, all the other guys are saying, good on you, baby, you know, you're doing it right. They got their beers. They get him out of the water, and he flops the catfish, if he can, above the bank, because if the catfish lets go, then you're going to lose the catfish. Or, in some cases, they carry the catfish on his arm back to his pickup truck and flop his arm in there into the back of the pickup, and the catfish lets go and takes most of the skin off of his arm. That's why you got your sleeve. You don't want to ruin your shirt, you know, but you want to show everybody you caught a really serious catfish, right? You're just bleeding like hell. The fish is flopping around in the back of the pickup. The beer cans are flying in the back, the empties. Because, you know, they're recyclers, some of these guys. And that's pretty much the end of it. That's noodling for catfish. Every year, somebody dies doing it. More than a few people do. So it's dangerous work. So that's why you got to have at least a 6-pack before you go down there to kind of get ready for it.
It sounds to me like Sheila's kind of fishing.
Who's Sheila?
Sheila Kerwin is on the line here. She's taking,
Sheila, you do that kind of stuff?
Wait, Sheila.
yeah,
You're
she's got.
muted.
Oh,
Sheila.
You're muted, Sheila, so we can't hear you.
I'm no longer muted. I've never done that, but it sounds like, well, I'm not sure if the blood and everything feels all that good, but I love the idea. I've had the catfish down south, though. Oh my God, that's good. That's good eating. That is good eating.
Well, I agree.
Yep.
We don't have any of that kind of fishing up here.
No, speaking of travels, you've done a lot of traveling. You talked about being, delaying a flight or two to get a little more fishing in. What of your traveling, fishing, adventures might you share with us as one of the most unusual or memorable for you?
Oh, gee, there's so many. Well, I've done a lot in the United States, of course, but I can think of one that was pretty interesting. Where I try to make it fairly brief, but a friend and a guy I traveled with went to Roatan, which is in Honduras, which you couldn't go to now because the drug folks are running the show, and we didn't do very well. So we decided we'd go over to the other side of the island just to see if we could find some bonefish. I forgot who mentioned whether they're going to find fish that have no bones in them. These have all bones pretty much. So we did that. We drove over the other side of the island. It's this little Caribbean town, and there's this guy there, and we said, "Hey," he said, "You folks you guys want to go fishing?" He said, yeah, we want to go fishing. Well, we got bonefish, lots of bonefish out here, and so we said, "Okay, how much?" He says, "Oh, $50." We said, "Oh, yeah, $50, we'll do it." So we went to his house, and his house is on a float. Everybody's living on boats there. and houseboats. And so we get in his boat, and he's got this little boat with a 1 horsepower inboard. It's an engine about this big. So he says, well, okay, we're going to go, boys. So we get in there, and then he goes about 100 feet, and he pulls over to this house, and out comes this kind of good-looking Roatan woman, and he says, hey, Mila, I need some gas. So we thinking, he's going to buy about 5 gallons of gas because we're going to go out in the ocean. She comes back, and she's got like a Pepsi quart bottle full of gas. And I said, well, thank you very much. So, we're looking at him like, well, how far are we going to go? He pours that gas he goes right into a little, about that much on the engine. And then he puts a cork back in the bottle, and off we go. And this thing uses so little gas. We went out there about 4 or 5 miles, and we never were sure we were ever going to get back. Fishing was terrible, but it was beautiful out there. We got off on a little island and kind of fooled around on the island, and he got a coconut down from the tree for us, and it was hotter than hell. And I don't believe we ever caught a fish. And we got back, and we get about a third of the way back, and the engine stops. And he looks at his bottle, and he says, oh, we got enough. He's got about that much gas in the bottom of his bottle. He pours it in there. We get back to the dock, and we had a great day. Well, that's the kind of fishing I really like.
That's good. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining us today, and I'll put a couple of these links in if you all that have attended are members of the Senior Center, I'll have your email so I can let you know. And Dave has written a couple of books, so I know he's talking about just finding what you can where you can, but I'm guessing that it wouldn't hurt to get a little advice from him by picking up one of his books. He's got a book on Central Cascades fishing and the Mount Rainier area, and you're also around town.